Welcome to the first Kick Off the Convo podcast. This is a bit of a pilot, it's a first run. It's the start of a new partnership between a local mental health campaign, which we'll talk about shortly, and our local Herefordshire and Worcestershire FA. So we want to just talk a little bit more about mental health, what's going on locally around mental health, and also the role of football and sport more generally in supporting people. So I hope you find this useful and informative, as well as a bit of fun too.
My name's Issey Fisher. I work as a football development officer for the Worcestershire FA. So my remit kind of covers disability, youth, male and inclusion. And then I head up the youth council and also inclusion advisory group as well to the Worcestershire FA.
Hi, I'm Meagan Walker. I'm the mental health marketing and service improvement officer at Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust.
Yeah, I'm Scott Russell. I'm part of Herefordshire FA. I am kind of concentrate on disability, inclusion, and recreation. I'm also part of the inclusion advisory group, and I'm the mental health champion for the county as well.
I'm Matt Stainsby. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist with Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust, and I'm particularly based in Hereford.
My name's Gary Morgan. I head up the communications team for Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care Trust. So we provide mental health support across both counties, and we also, with our partners, we lead the campaign called Now We're Talking, which I can introduce a bit more about now. And then we can talk a bit more about this partnership and why we think it's really something for us to pursue and get people engaged and involved. I think there's a reflection that over the last few years, really, mental health is obviously much more on the agenda now than possibly ever before. And with that, there's been an increase, which Matt might talk about later on the amount of services and support that's available for people. There's probably never been more services and support for people than there is at the moment. That's a really good thing, but it can also make things a little bit more complex and confusing potentially for people to really know where to go and where to turn to. So Now We're Talking has been created to try and bring stuff together in one sort of consolidated space, really. So we have the Now We're Talking website, which we can put on the screen, hopefully, or I'll give you the link later, which hopefully puts together all the stuff that people can access, including ways that you can maintain positive mental health and well-being, right through to where you can turn to if you're really struggling and you need urgent help and support. So that's what we've been trying to do, and part of spreading the word really is trying to engage with lots of different groups, attend lots of different events, engage the local media, to try and get the word out there, really encourage people to talk and have conversations about mental health, but also to access those resources on the website that I've just mentioned. And that's kind of brought us to talking to Issey and Scott, really looking at the local football community, the local sport community, and thinking about how can we work more closely with you. There's obviously thousands of people that will be engaged in local football, whether it's watching it, playing it, supporting it, running the line, and everything in between. And it's a community that perhaps we haven't engaged with before. We want to say make mental health part of our everyday conversations and make mental health part of normal life, really. And obviously the amount of people that are involved in local sport is huge. So we thought this was an interesting area to tap into. So the podcast is one thing that we're doing. We've done some advertising in the local media over the last few weeks around the start of the World Cup, which you may have seen, and we've got lots of stuff planned, hopefully over the course of the coming few months as well. So from a Trust NHS perspective, we absolutely should be getting out and talking to real groups, real people, kind of getting out in our community where things are happening. And this has sort of brought us to Issey and Scott. From an FA's perspective, I'll come to you, Scott, first, and the reason why Herefordshire FA are keen on getting involved in this. Are you able just to talk a bit about what's in it for you, I guess?
Yeah, so for me personally, so as a mental health champion for the county, it's just again about creating that awareness that we all have mental health, and it's to remove that stigma that it's a negative thing. There's a lot of pressures that go in life with not just within football, but family life, personal life, and really as a community and a social environment, football can play a massive part. We know that playing football or sport in general is really good for not just your physical well-being, but your mental well-being. So for me, it's just really important that we can let people know what actually there is around not just in Herefordshire but Worcestershire, and some might want to be contacted directly, but some maybe don't want to, and they need to find their own avenue. So really, as a mental health champion, I'm just there to try and facilitate and point them in the right direction. So linking in with you guys, it's just another area to tap into, and it's only going to have positive impact, in my opinion.
Great, cheers, Scott. And Issey, I guess a similar situation and position for Worcestershire as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, similar to Scott, it's just about kind of battling that kind of negative stigma that surrounds mental health, particularly around like men's mental health as well, and young men's mental health. And also, I've been looking on numerous websites and, social media and bits and pieces. It seems like kind of that low socioeconomic, background and context and everything. It seems to have it's quite concentrated in terms of, people having suicidal thoughts, poor mental health, etc. And, traditionally football's quite a working class game as well. So it's how can we utilise football and the power of sport, etc. How can we use that to improve people's mental health and just give them a bit of a non-traditional support network to help people improve their mental health and just become a little bit more open and honest around conversations surrounding mental health as well.
That's great, thanks, Issey. And I think coming to you as well, Matt, obviously as our resident sort of clinical expert, whether you signed up for that or not, that's kind of where you are in this. So where are we in terms of mental health? Obviously we've had a really tough few years. We've got lots of social challenges at the moment. We're talking specifically about sport and football and how that can support people, but it may just be useful just to sort of update us on what's the situation locally, nationally. What are you seeing in clinics and services at the moment?
Yeah, I think you're touching on some things already. Just touching on the fact that mental health problems are very prevalent. They're very common. They're quite normal. And actually, over the pandemic, we saw an increase, certainly for a large proportion of society, an increase in anxiety, depression around that time for various reasons. A lot of isolation came into that as well, which had a big knock-on effect. And thinking more broadly over a longer period of time, we're seeing increased rates of certain problems certainly amongst young women. And you mentioned men already. Men are very underrepresented in services, so I tend to be less likely to come and get help, but actually are overrepresented when you get to things like suicide and violent and substance use, that kind of stuff. So kind of some interesting trends around. And I think, mentioning football and sport there's huge potential here. I think, you're talking about stigma. Shame is such a huge part of mental health problems, and shame pushes us to be isolated. And we know that isolation is a huge factor. So this feels like great potential for reach and for de-shaming. So really good.
In terms of the FA's role in this, I mean, I guess obviously it's facilitating, supporting people to engage in football throughout the different sort of levels, from the sort of on a rec stuff that I used to do right through to some of the semi-pro stuff. Well, what's the role of FAs generally now? Has it changed over the last sort of decade or so? Is there much more sort of almost pastoral type support that's available for people who do engage in clubs and those sort of activities?
Yeah, I think the FA has changed drastically over the last 5-10 years, more so the last 5 regarding what they offer as an organisation, as a governing body. We link in closely with Mind. I know we have our local Herefordshire Mind that we are a partner charity with, and I think there is more reason to promote. That there is a support network out there, especially with myself with disability, and I have people with learning difficulties as well, and all these kind of aspects. It's understanding that actually you may be classed as a person with a disability, however you might play mainstream football, and they may have their own issues with that, and vice versa. So it's just basically being available to help those that maybe are looking to improve their mental health.
And Issey, in Worcestershire, we're obviously blessed with some really, great football teams. And at the moment, Herefordshire have been on a really good FA Cup run. Kidderminster Harriers too. Worcester City are doing all right. My hometown, Bromsgrove, seems to be on the way back to. Do you engage with those kind of teams? And have you seen a difference in terms of the support that they will provide for players as well? Obviously, it's semi-professional level, so perhaps not the elite level where we sort of hear a lot more, don't we? But is there more support at that sort of semi-pro end as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not so much in terms of us supporting them, but that we can get involved a bit more, and I think we should do with that. But in terms of, they'll have kind of their community aspects of their club, which they work quite heavily on. Like Kidderminster Harriers will have their kind of side of community trusts, etc., which they'll look to improve like mental health and bits and pieces on, just looking a bit more into it and how they as a club can support people through that, especially kind of men's mental health as well. And then hopefully in future podcasts as well, we'll have the first team manager for Kiddie to come on as well, just give his view on it. But I think it's incredibly important for us as a county FA to link in with all these clubs and kind of on an individual basis ensure that there's something like a little hub, or there's a person responsible to ensure that mental health is something that's looked at quite heavily within that, because especially if you look at kind of like whoever might be in an academy set up within these clubs. I mean, less so Worcester City, but perhaps with like Kiddie Harriers, it's really important that people, that they might be let go by academies, but that doesn't mean that they then can't be supported mentally in the right way, because, you know, being released by an academy is an awful thing anyway, and it can be detrimental to people's mental health and well-being. So I think it's essential that we work with clubs, you know, from here on out, just ensuring everything's in place, resources are there, and people just get the right help that they might need.
I guess, Matt, what we're talking about is sort of real life issues and scenarios which really affect how people feel, isn't it? There's mental health, and then there's life issues which can be really challenging for people. And Issey's given an example of a young person who's perhaps been let go through an academy. Do you think services are geared up for that, or as a society we really understand that what happens in your life can impact your mental well-being? Is that something that's clearly understood, and our services, I guess, set up to support that?
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly over recent decades, we've had an increasing understanding that what you experience in life, what you go through, has a massive knock-on effect in the way you feel, the kind of problems that you experience, and there's really strong links there. And certainly in services, so we call this trauma-informed care. We're pushing this as a national agenda, and locally this is something that we're rolling out and helping different teams to understand. And that really is all about that. It's understanding that you know, what you've been through has a huge impact, and tells that story tells a lot about the kind of problems you have now. So we used to ask people, what's wrong with you? And now we say, you know, what's happened to you? What have you been through? And I think, you know, that's a really important part of destigmatizing things as well, to say it's not something in you that's the problem, it's what you've experienced.
And I guess nothing's too trivial, because it's very personal to you, isn't it? So, you know, being released from an academy, as is his example, might to other people seem quite a trivial issue, but to that individual that can have a profound impact on the next few years of their life, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Trauma isn't defined by the event itself; it's the way it impacts someone. And of course, if you've invested a lot of time and years to get to an academy, and then that's something that doesn't work out for you, then that's a huge thing to go through, a massive loss. So yeah, big deal.
I think on the flip side as well, I know from an FA's point of view, you know, it's all very well those that are involved within football, but it's also offering those that maybe aren't involved in football, or maybe have had no interest in football. It's about giving them a platform of playing a certain format that might suit them. So, you know, you've got armed forces, veterans that maybe, you know, have missed that social engagement with people since they've left the army, and it's given them an opportunity to get involved with people, like-minded people. You know, we do a project with dementia and early onset dementia, for what we class as the forgotten age, the young people, and we want to give them an opportunity where they can still play, if it's walking football, if it's six-a-side football. You know, there's things that we've got refugees and asylum seekers who have come over to a country that, you know, is new to them. It's a language that's new to them, and their mental health is also tested. So I think with those areas, it's not just about individuals, but it's trying to support family and friends as well that are involved in it. And again, that's why it's important to get involved with the organisations like this.
At a national level as well, this seems to be much more on the agenda. We see lots of high profile people coming out and talking about this. And I guess, Scott, from your perspective, what sort of impact does that have? Or do you see that kind of impact in the work that you do when somebody does come out and talk quite openly about their own experiences?
I mean, obviously, the more elite you go, it becomes a bit more like a business, doesn't it? With the money that's involved with that, and the pressures just on results. You look at England now with Gareth Southgate and all the media and some would say propaganda against, you know, his decision making. You're never going to please everybody. You've got to have thick skin, that's for sure. But again, you know, you look at Hereford FC and Kidderminster that maybe aren't getting the results that they need, and the pressure that you get, you know, and social media is a massive thing on that as well. It gives people a platform to voice their opinions, rightfully or wrongfully. You've just got to take it. And I think whereas before you could probably step away from it and you could get away from the good and the bad, I think now we're in an environment, in an area where we get it 24/7. You know, you're always going to get your critics, and I think it's important that you have that welfare team around you. And again, it's the important thing is ask if someone's okay. that's the key thing. Don't be afraid to ask. I was told before when I went on a course, if someone says, if you ask them, how are you, you're okay? And they say, I'm fine. Well, that's the default setting. Fine means nothing. So ask them again, and don't be afraid to, really check. So I think that's important. And that leads up to again, from if it's elite level all the way down to grassroots level.
It's interesting you were saying about, I've been to football matches with the most mild-mannered of people, and you put them in a football scenario, and the criticism, bordering abuse that they will shout at people, and it's like totally out of character, but it feels like it's okay in that environment. And I guess it is probably us all thinking as a society about those kind of situations, and actually it probably isn't all right. It's because it's a football player or a football manager or whatever, it still probably isn't right for us to do that. So I think you're right. It's probably we focus on individuals and players, but it's also us as spectators and as consumers of sport to probably think a little bit about what we're doing when we're either on social media, giving our strong views on somebody's performance, the impact that will have as well. And again, from a player welfare perspective, is you think that's developing, that's improving. There's an understanding there, at least within the clubs, that people are being subject to that, and it's something that we need to be conscious of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because in the day and age that we're growing up, we've got, young people these days that social media is all that they've known. They've never known a world without social media. So sometimes that is the outlet to then express views, but sometimes those views, whilst they're someone's opinion and they're entitled to their own opinion, as you said, it borderlines on abuse and discrimination and everything. And that does just have such a massive impact, a negative impact on that player, on that club, etc. So, and just the sheer, if you take someone like who plays in the England national team, for example, or a high level Premier League club, you can imagine the thousands upon thousands of comments they get on their social media posts or on Twitter, etc. And you can just imagine the kind of abuse that might build up. Say they had not the greatest performance on one game, and they might get, hundreds of thousands of poor comments and abusive comments. And, that then does dribble into racism as well, homophobia, etc. So there's all these different things that we need to think about that social media does amplify, which is a really great shame.
I have an 11-year-old who plays football, and it's not, the abuse isn't just aimed at or targeted or focused on adult games either. Even kids that are playing are subject to stuff that you just think in any other situational scenario, it wouldn't be tolerated or acceptable. And I suppose, Matt, from your perspective, and we come on to kind of the campaign in a second and what we're looking to do over the next few months and some early ideas that we've got, but if you are in that situation, whether you're a younger person or an adult, and you are experiencing something, you are struggling, you kind of feel as if you don't quite know where to go and stuff. What's the one bit of advice you might give to people?
Oh wow, yeah, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I think talk to people really is the main thing. The worst thing that you can do is be suffering in silence, and it's so easy to feel like you're on your own and cut off from people. And I think, Scott, you mentioned earlier, that thing of ask if you see that someone's struggling, asking them how they're doing, and of course the default response is I'm all right, I'm fine, and that's that follow up about how you're really doing. I think that kind of connection for other people, inviting them to talk, and if you're experiencing problems yourself, talking to people that you're close to and being open about that is probably the most important thing to do.
And Scott, in terms of teams as well, and I'm thinking about, again, I only played Sunday League stuff, but even in that sort of dressing room environment, the importance of people just noticing somebody and having conversations and just talking to each other, asking again a couple of times if they're all right. I guess that's the sort of the simple thing that can unlock something for somebody that's been building up, isn't it? And that's where sport becomes quite powerful, that kind of team and that unity that you might get, whether it's Sunday League stuff or whether it's World Cup quarterfinals. It's that team unity that can be massively important to people.
I mean, I think I can't talk on behalf of full-time players, but if you're in a full-time environment in that change room, you might be more likely to ask how somebody is and have a genuine concern for them. I think from a grassroots level, you might see them maybe once, twice a week. And I think there is that stigma still, especially in the men's game, about you don't really ask how they are, or you don't tell them how you are. From being an ex-player myself and now a manager, I try and speak to individuals privately and just ask them the question, how's things, how's work? Because, end of the day, the level that I manage at, family and work is a priority before football. So you've got to make sure, I'm quite relaxed about if they're struggling with work or life, then don't have to, I don't demand they play football. And I think it's important from a manager's, coach's point of view, especially at grassroots level, that you take that into consideration. But then also, like I say, there are some players who will have a genuine concern for other teammates. Issey, I don't know what it's like on the women's changing room. If I'm assuming they're more open.
Yeah, I mean, the women's game and the men's game is really different. I don't know why it's really different, but it is. But I think, I play for Worcester City women, and we've kind of got this whole motto of La Familia. So we're all one family, we're a football family. So, within our team, it is quite, whilst we do build those individual connections with 2-3 members of the team, etc., as a club, we're very much together. We're quite close. We talk about different bits and pieces. But I think traditionally, I don't know, it's kind of those age-old stigmas and, society around men's mental health. It's just, I don't know what it is about men's mental health sometimes, but it just doesn't get talked about. I don't know whether men might feel embarrassed. I don't know whether they might not know what to say, what words to use, who to talk to about things. Or that they just don't want to. They rather just get on with things. But yeah, particularly in the women's game, I just feel like it's slightly. If you go to a women's football match, say England women's, the Lionesses, the environment is so much less hostile than it is at a men's game. The differences are incredible. So I think because it has that much more friendly kind of atmosphere and it's a bit more open and inclusive, I think from that people then feel that they can talk a little bit more amongst each other, whereas at the men's, it's not kind of taking those steps yet. In time, it might do, but just at the moment, it still has that stigma around mental health and around the whole atmosphere of men's football. And I think it might need to be addressed in a bit more detail and in different ways as well.
You raised a really important point, which is a real bugbear of mine, actually. It's the nervousness sometimes of having a conversation and working in a comms role like I do. I've forgotten how many times somebody said, don't use that word, don't say that. And actually the word that you're using is absolutely fine, but it might not be perfect. It might not be perfect for everybody. I just wonder whether there's something there, Matt. And I guess this is why bringing in and working with other communities like the local football communities is really important in normalising the conversations that people can have. Because Scott's right, we're probably asking people who clearly aren't mental health professionals, but might not have any experience of mental health to kind of facilitate conversations with people, which is quite a difficult place to be in. Do we have to be, I'm quite clear on what my views on this are, but we're interested from a clinical perspective, do we have to be a bit more relaxed about language here and not hammer somebody if they say something slightly wrong? You can tell I've been burnt by that in the past, can't you? But there's something about being a bit more chilled out. The most important thing is that we're having conversations, even if the language and the conversations aren't perfect. Is that sort of a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've referenced like social media or being at a football match when you're a faceless person. We're very quick these days to jump into some pretty harsh judgments, and that can even be harshly judging language people are using when the motivation is actually quite a good one. And I think there's something about the way that we act and we operate when we're in a more of a kind of competitive, conflict, threat-based kind of state of mind, and the way that we act when we're kind of coming from a place of caring and feeling like we're better together and a bit kinder to each other. And I think there's we could all do with a bit more of that. I think that's important. And there's something I guess we were talking about earlier, this sort of fear we have often of talking about stuff with people, because if you've got a problem, guy or women, perhaps more for guys, it's scary to talk about it because it feels like it's not an all right thing to say. And if you see someone who's struggling, it's also scary to say, how are you doing? Because it's a really unfamiliar conversation to have. And there's a kind of saying that worry gives a small thing a big shadow, and the fear of speaking up or asking people how they're doing can make us just go, you know what, I'll swerve that, I'll avoid it for now. And actually when you step into it and you talk out, very rarely are things as bad as you think they're going to be, and some great things can come from that when you connect with someone in that way. Like if you say to a mate, I'm struggling, and they're like, yeah, I've been there too, that's worth more than a lot of mental health professional contacts. So yeah.
From my own personal experience, if somebody really, really close to me asked if I was all right, I'd probably be more nervous about talking to them than I would somebody who was a bit more arm's length. And again, that comes back to people who you might meet up with once a week on a Sunday morning or whatever, and it's having those conversations with people. I'd be much more comfortable, I think, talking to people like that. I find myself in situations where within a couple of minutes I'm talking to not strangers, but again, people who are a little bit more distant to me and talking about things I'd never tell somebody really close to me. So again, it's potentially about having the confidence to unlock those conversations, even if you're not, really, really close to somebody. You might just be the person that makes all the difference. I don't know if you've sort of experienced that in dressing rooms you've been involved with, Scott, or teams that you've been leading.
Well, what I would say is, sometimes just to be asked a question and almost forced to give an answer, that there's a bit of relief that someone's asked that question, because otherwise they probably wouldn't have said, no, I'm struggling. And that can open, a whole lot of emotions that maybe they weren't prepared to share, but actually now they have, and that's, again, it's the stigma again. I think, again, changing rooms with me within the men's game, we joke around. If something happens, we just joke about it. It's a bit of a laugh, and you kind of bury it under the carpet. If I'm brutally honest, that's from my experience of, I think I started playing men's football when I was 14. So it's been interesting to see how football has progressed, though. But I think another area that doesn't help is probably tabloids, newspapers. How they we talk about suicide, for instance, and it's how they always talk about committed suicide. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it used to be a crime. I think it was in 1961. But of course, to say you've committed is suggesting you've made it. It's a crime, which it isn't. So I think, again, we talk about terminology, and I think it's just important to think about that. And again, programs on TV and how they portray mental health, I think sometimes they maybe should do a bit more research into how it should be done, personally, from my experience. But again, and I from a sporting point of view, there are some sports that are really good on it, and like I say, the women's game in football is really good with the inclusivity and everything, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I think, but small steps lead to big strides, don't they?
We've just come on to where people can go. What can they do? So obviously, there's having those conversations locally with people that you're close to or not so close to. The other thing that I think we're really keen from a campaign perspective is just to try and change the narrative a bit. I think there's probably a perception out there that mental health is hard work. It feels like hard work. It's hard work to get to. It's hard work to get the support that you need. There's lots at the moment about waiting times and waiting lists and stuff, which in some areas is completely right. But again, Matt, I think we touched at the start about there's probably more out there now than perhaps ever before, and there's stuff that you can kind of access really quickly, isn't there? There's online stuff, there's group stuff. Is there an opportunity through things like this for me is to try and just change that narrative a bit, that certain elements of mental health can take some time to get to, but don't despair that there's lots of stuff in the meantime that can be really useful. Is that, again, sort of a fair assessment of where we are from a support service perspective?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we've seen, certainly in the NHS, we've had good funding coming in recent years, and there's really been an attempt to kind of broaden out access to mental health services, to wrap around GP surgeries a lot more, make things local, and there's plenty of work to do there. But I think things are moving in a good direction. And as you say, there's a lot of places that people can access support, be that, I think, through things like Samaritans and so on, that are non-NHS. But GPs are always really good places to go to speak up in confidence, and they can direct people to the right place. And people can self-refer to services like Healthy Minds as well, that we have locally. You wouldn't leave your car for too long if you had a problem with it. So, I think if you're seeing that there's problems there and you think, actually, I need more than I can get through my friends and my family, then, definitely try to be brave enough to reach out and ask for help in that way.
I think through this campaign and this partnership, we're going to be doing hopefully a lot more of sharing all of those resources that are available for people. So hopefully some quite practical advice and support that people might find useful. In terms of the campaign, they're moving forward. Obviously, we're early days. We did some stuff around the start of the World Cup. We've got lots more stuff planned. Issey, what's your kind of your future view of this? Where do you think this sort of partnership would go, or will go, or could go? We've talked about a few wacky and wonderful ideas, haven't we, already, about tournaments and sponsorships and all sorts of stuff. Any sort of views and thoughts about where this next 12 months might look like, or where it might take us?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously we've got the podcast that we're kicking off with today. So that will hopefully just run kind of for the foreseeable future as well, really getting in different guests. As I said, Kitty Harrier's first team manager hopefully will join us next time as well. And I think there's kind of quite a variety of different things that we could do within the partnership, within, you know, with the NHS, with Herefordshire, with Scott, and with other county FAs as well. So I think one thing that would be really good for us to look at is have kind of almost CPD evenings, so continuous professional development, specifically looking to kind of get clubs, players, volunteers involved and actually looking at mental health from a different perspective. So how can we provide the right resources to help people kind of open up a little bit more? Or can we look to kind of designate, for example, like a mental health champion in each of the grassroots club as well, and team up with the NHS and Herefordshire to look to see how we could implement that across both counties? I think it would be really good. And in terms of kind of like having little tournaments, etc., you know, we could have a little five-a-side tournament where we can try and raise money for things like Mind, for the NHS, you know, numerous different charities as well. And just be really kind of open and honest and use football as kind of a vehicle to make this change that's really needed. You know, whether you're a young player, whether you're kind of 55-year-old manager, whether you're, you know, a retired veteran who wants to watch and support a certain team in Worcestershire or Herefordshire, it's kind of something for everyone really. So I think it would be really exciting.
It's the hook, isn't it, that hopefully opens up lots of different opportunities. And Scott, same question really. What's your kind of aspirations for this? Where do you think we could go? Give some weird and wonderful ideas that you've got as well.
I mean, like, it's similar to what Issey said. You know, it's about getting events going. For me, it's networking. It's great having you guys involved with just us, but then obviously it's the other charities and the other organisations. It's trying to get them all under one umbrella, and so we can find somewhere that somebody could get pointed to in the right direction. Look, I'm all for wacky and new things, and anything that we think is going to have an impact. I know, Issey, you have a similar way to me. We'll be well up for it. We're talking about a year. However, I'm thinking beyond that. I'm thinking of to keep the continuity and to keep it sustainable. It's probably about being relevant, stay relevant, link up with main events that we do. But likewise, it's just, you know, have a bit of passion to what you do, get the people involved, and I think that will keep people engaged.
From our perspective, the NHS isn't always great at going. This is again what I said, it's probably in the right terminology, but go into normal areas, to normal places, to normal community groups, to normal communities. We tend to expect people to come to us. So I think getting out there on Sunday mornings when it's freezing cold and pouring down with rain, that's kind of where we should be, and Saturday afternoons, of course. So we're really keen to be really flexible and get out there and get the word out as much as we possibly can. And I'll probably just finish a little bit by talking about the where people can go, the practical advice that we can signpost people to. So I mentioned at the start that now we're talking a website, which is an NHS site, but it's supported by lots of different partners across both counties. The way that we've built the site, I think, is quite important. I think, again, mental health campaigns generally start from the point of where do you go when you're feeling rough? But our campaign starts with how do you stay really well? So, you know, the things that you can do to maintain positive mental health and get engaging in activities and sports and football and socialising with other people is a key part of that. Lots of information about what you can do there. If you have been struggling for a few weeks and you feel like things are starting to get on top of you, it's affecting your relationships, then Matt mentioned Healthy Mind, which is a service for people. But again, there's other online things that you can access pretty quickly and immediately. And then also there's things for people who are really struggling and need some urgent support and advice. So the website hopefully categorises things in quite a neat way for people. So it's www.nowwe'retalking.nhs.uk. That's right, Meg, isn't it? We need to get that bit right. So that's the place immediately for people to go to, and there's access to support, which again is available across Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And Meg, I will just bring you in. Is there anything else from a campaign perspective that people might want to be aware of, with other things that we've got lined up over the next few months that people might want to look out for?
Yeah, I think really sort of, as we've already touched on with the campaign, I suppose the main message is getting Now We're Talking and that support that's available out there for people to access, however we do that through football. And I think a lot of that is sort of starting from that top level and filtering down. I think one of the things that you've seen a lot recently in football is with youth players on pitches covering their mouths. when talking to each other, which is something that's filtered down from Premier League players being on TV. And I think that sort of process of how we get people talking about their mental health from grassroots upwards is from starting from that top and making sure that we're there at the front of things and that everything is available to access that they can. And I think with the Now We're Talking website, that's sort of that place to go for all mental health in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And we've got all those assets there. We've also got a professional hub on the website, which has links for people working in Herefordshire and Worcestershire that maybe have some experience with mental health in their day-to-day job. They might have none at all, but there's resources there that can help with signposting with those difficult conversations. And that starts from everything from the keeping a healthy mind to if you're struggling and more from that as well. So I think just to know that that's there and available. And obviously it's accessible online all the time.
Yeah, loads more to see, and hopefully if you keep an eye out for Now We're Talking, follow us on social media. The podcast, I think, will go out, Scott, over the next couple of days, and you can see it kind of everywhere. It's the first one. We thought we'd give it a stab. We've got a few things lined up for the next one in January. So, yeah, Scott, I guess across all the social channels, you'll be able to find this, won't you?
Yeah, and I think also as well, it's a case of if those that do watch this, if they've got anything that they want us to talk about, let us know. And let's try and mould it around what people want rather than what we think they want. So yeah.
And Issey, you say Russell from Kiddie Harriers next up?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to get in touch with him just to make sure he still can make it. And yeah, it'll be exciting times to have him on.
Great stuff. Okay, well, I think it leaves me just to thank everyone for being involved in this first one. Hopefully, it was useful and informative. As I say, we'll be perhaps theming the future ones as well. And so yeah, as Scott said, let us know if there's certain areas that you want a bit more information on, and we can either theme them or we can do them more broadly and cover it, whatever works for people really. So it's the start of hopefully a good relationship between the NHS and the local FA. So I hope you find it useful, and stay tuned for the next one.